Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much. I am proud to speak on the fiscal year 2024 Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Bill for floor consideration today. Anybody who's read the bill, you know that it's pretty straightforward. If you are a friend, an ally of the United States, this bill supports you. But if you are an adversary or are cozying up to the adversaries of the United States, then frankly, you're just not going to like this bill. I am extremely proud of this legislation, which was carefully and thoughtfully developed over many, many months. In my judgment, it reflects the values and the interests of most Americans. We carefully reviewed all the organizations and programs that receive U.S. taxpayer dollars in this bill. And among the key factors, let me be very blunt, it's whether investments advance our national security interests, whether they can show demonstrated results, and our need to reduce the national debt and to reduce spending in a responsible way. So the State and Foreign Operations and Related Programs Bill totals $51.5 billion. It cuts $8.2 billion, that's a 14% reduction, below the 2023 enacted level, and $17 billion, or 25% below the President's request. In fact, it is $2.7 billion below the FY19 enacted level, and it's $288 million below even the fiscal year 15 enacted level. So because of those cuts, of those responsible reductions, we are now able to prioritize funding for the national security threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Look, it's time that the U.S., that we get serious about that malign, destabilizing, negative actions of the Communist Chinese Party around the world. So this this bill does precisely that in an unprecedented manner. So let me talk a little bit about that. The bill includes $4.4 billion, which is $1 billion above the President's budget request, to fund programs to counter the threat of the Chinese Communist Party around the world. For the first time, this bill includes $500 million in foreign military financing for Taiwan. First time ever. These funds, as everybody knows, are critical to support our friend and our democratic ally, which is on the front lines of China's bullying and China's constant threats. This bill provides unwavering support for our democratic ally, Israel, and other key partners around the world. Another priority is to strengthen efforts to counter fentanyl production and trafficking. I don't have to tell you all that deadly opioids, particular fentanyl, are affecting every area, every district, every neighborhood in our entire country. 300 Americans die every single day because of fentanyl poisoning. And we must, and we do, use every tool to combat this horrific, deadly epidemic. And obviously the migration crisis at the southern border is really just symptomatic of the administration's lack of a clear strategy towards the Western Hemisphere, and that's as nice as I can say it. Mr. Chairman, for too long, countries cozying up to our adversaries have been rewarded, and this bill puts a stop to that practice. This bill also recognizes the growing threat of authoritarian regimes, even here in our own hemisphere and around the world. Therefore, it fully funds democracy assistance accounts in support of freedom and human rights where they are most threatened. Now, before discussing funding for the United Nations, I just want to remind folks, members, and also anybody who might be watching, who's running the show at the UN. It would be hard to even make this stuff up, but unfortunately, remarkably, what I'm about to tell you is true. So Russia was chair of the UN Security Council during the month of April. Yeah, you've heard me right. Iran is currently an elected vice president of the UN General Assembly. Communist China, whose genocide against the Uyghurs and their bullying around the world is notorious, and Cuba, one of the world's oldest and most brutal dictatorships, both of those countries sit on the UN Human Rights Council. Yeah, you heard me right. And North Korea, well, I can't even begin to talk about the atrocities of that dictatorship, is a member of the World Health Organization, while Taiwan, a responsible democracy, has been blocked from membership of that institution by Communist China. That's all in the category, you can't make this stuff up. Therefore, it should come as no surprise to anybody that no funds are included in this bill for the UN regular budget. Now, my dear friends on the other side of the aisle argue that by cutting some of the funding to the UN, the U.S. has given up its leadership. I could not disagree in stronger terms. You see, simply continuing to unconditionally channel funds to a deeply flawed organization, despite multiple failures and, frankly, an appalling even continuously anti-Semitic actions by that institution, that is actually abandoning our responsibility to the U.S. taxpayer, and it ensures that nothing changes in that institution that I just mentioned. Actions need to have consequences, and the UN finally will feel the consequences of their irresponsible actions because of how we deal with them in this bill. This bill also prohibits funds for the Green Climate Fund and the Green Technology Fund. We also address a frivolous expansion of State Department bureaucracy. This bill eliminates funding for special envoys and special representatives that are not authorized or have not been confirmed by the Senate. Look, if they're that important, then for God's sake, have them authorized by Congress, or at least confirmed by the Senate. Finally, this bill includes all long-standing pro-life protections, which includes a prohibition on taxpayer funds from being used to pay for abortions abroad. And it builds on those requirements by applying the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance Policy to all global health funding. It is not surprising that after this bill was released, my colleagues on the other side immediately released a press release condemning it. Now, what might surprise you is what the minority party, in their written press release, actually chose to highlight that they are objecting to in this bill. Their press release criticized that this bill prohibits funding for the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Heck yeah, we prohibit funding to that institution. Or that we eliminate funding for the EcoHealth Alliance, or gain-of-function research. And, quoting from my colleagues on the Democratic side, their criticism of this bill, that we reduce funding for, quote, any lab controlled by China, Russia, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela. I'm quoting from their press release. Heck yeah, we're cutting funding for institutions from those countries. These countries are, in essence, the official list of United States foreign adversaries. And 3, by the way, are on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Does any taxpayer think that taxpayer funds should be going to labs in those places? Really? My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in writing, also expressed concerns of what they call, quote-unquote, partisan writers. That specifically highlighted, however, specifically highlighted the provisions on funds in this bill to the government of the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party, and also that we prevent lending from international financial institutions to the PRC. Yeah, they put that in writing. Well, one thing is true. They got that right. They caught me. We are eliminating funding to adversaries of the United States of America. And I would argue it's about damn time we did that. So I look forward to hearing my colleagues on the other side of the aisle explain why U.S. taxpayer money should be funding those programs. And, by the way, why writing a blank check to any organization is a demonstration of leadership. It is not. Mr. Chairman, before I close, I want to thank the staff from the Appropriations Committee for their amazing work on this bill. Susan Adams was here with me, Craig Higgins, Jamie McCormick, Trey Hicks, Meg Gallagher, John Muscolini, Clelia Alvarado, and Joe Cutler. And equally, from the minority side, and I always butcher her last name, and I apologize because I'll probably do it again, Erin Kolodeski, I butchered that again, Lori Mignon, and Lillian Waisbury. I also want to thank from my personal staff, Cesar Gonzalez, Giselle Reynolds, Autumn Morley, from my personal office. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for bringing this crucial legislation to the floor, which supports our allies, protects our national security in a smart, efficient, effective, and thoughtful way. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I reserve the balance of my time. Thank you, sir.